Or a premix fuel can. I just use some scrap aluminum in the Arizona sun for 5-6 months at a time at my wood pile. And this poly... Hey there guys, I know it's been a little while since my last video, but I can assure you I am doing fine. But I do appreciate the messages of concern that I received from several of you asking if I was okay. Been fine. We just had a busy last couple of months with some trips and some hunts, an elk hunt and a couple of deer hunts, and doing a whole bunch of honeydew projects around the house that had kind of been building up for years, like stucco and drywall and painting. But I am back in the mix of things, and I've got several projects that are getting pretty close to being finished. And today I am out in the mountains behind my house getting some firewood, and I figured it'd be a good opportunity to show you guys what I use to go get firewood, bring it home, chop it up, split it up so it can be used in the fireplace. I'm going to show you my little chainsaw box where I kind of keep all of my chainsaw essentials. And then I'm going to give you my opinions on my Fiskars axes, which I know are like one of the most maligned axes, but I really don't think they're too bad. And I think they are a pretty good axe as long as you understand what they were intended for and you use them within those constraints. And now I'll show you this. And then... Alright, first up is my chainsaw box. This holds all of my essentials that I need to go out with my chainsaw for a few hours and cut firewood. Everything from fueling it up to making small repairs, changing chains, and everything in between is held in a nice little package. And before I get into the chainsaw box, if you're wondering, the chainsaw I use is a Stihl MS290, otherwise known as a farmboss. I've had it for about 10 years and love it. It's a great chainsaw. And anyway, to the box, the first thing you'll probably notice is what are the bright stripes on the outside for? Well, years ago I was cutting firewood on a camping trip and I set this down, and it took me quite a while to find it because obviously it's green and it blends in. So I just painted some bright stripes on it. And then the other thing you'll notice is on the front I made a little holder for a premix fuel can. I just used some scrap aluminum and some rivets. And anyway, I like to use the premix fuel because I find that the saw runs better with it, and you're less likely to improperly mix some fuel up that could eventually gunk up your saw down the road. And now I'll get into the contents. So on the top here, I hold some safety glasses that I just have stored in a little piece of foam just to protect the lenses. Obviously important when you're using that. And then I carry ear protection just in these fold-up ear muffs, although I'm often guilty of not putting those on because I'm usually listening to something in my earbuds. And then the next thing that'll come out is bar and chain oil. This is just an old aluminum water bottle that I painted with the same paint there just to make it a little easier to find. And that is enough for probably three and a half fill-ups on the bar and chain oil. And then next thing I have kind of in the realm of the safety equipment is just some leather gloves. And always have to have your scrunch. This way I can change the bar, change the chain, flip the bar between each fill-up, which I like to do. That way everything wears evenly. And then I carry an assortment of files. These are files for chains, and I have two different diameters. I can't tell you off the top of my head the diameters of each one of these. And the reason I carry two is because I once bought a replacement chain for this, but I bought the chain that has the thinner cutting teeth, or narrower cutting teeth. So I basically have two different diameters of cutting teeth chains. They're the same length, they fit the chainsaw fine, but because of that I have to carry two files, and those are the handles. They just pop off. And then this is just a generic file so that I can use to touch up my axes if I need to out in the field. And this is just a little file guide for the rake portion of your chain that kind of cleans out the cut. And then I carry one of these little felling wedges. I'm not like a tree cutter or a professional logger, but I find this is nice to hammer in if you're cutting a standing dead tree, just to keep your chainsaw from binding up potentially. I rarely use it, but I just carry it just because. And then the next thing I have in there is I just have a little generic cleaning brush. I like to, after each use, clean my chainsaw really well, because if you're cutting, especially in maybe it's misting or it's moist out, you don't want that wet wood staying in the inner workings of your chain, and this can kind of poke in there and clean everything really nice. And just in case I run out of fuel but I have gas, I carry a pre-mixed 2-cycle oil that I can do that if necessary, but if at all possible, I like to use the premix. And then I carry a couple of replacement chains. These are used chains that I've sharpened myself, but with these chains, I also store in the boxes a spare spark plug, a spare fuel filter, a spare cap, because I have had the cap on the bar and chain oil brake and the gas brake. And so I got 2 extra chains, and then I have 2 extra fuel. This is another fuel filter. This one I just store in that little container. And that is pretty much it. Oh, and in case my chainsaw goes out, I also take a hand saw like this bow saw. And the reason I take this is so I could cut down some wood and just take it in, you know, like 10-foot lengths back to camp, back to my house, until I can get my chainsaw back up and running and cut it the proper way. And now for the axes. Many of you will recognize these as Fiskars and or Gerber branded axes. It's the same company, but they are essentially a polycarbonate handled axe where the head is fused in. And if you do a little research online, you will find a whole community of people that love to hate on these things, and I think that's a bit unfair. I think what happens is people buy these and they expect them to be a very high quality logger axe with a Swedish steel or something like that, and that is really not what they were ever intended to be. But if you were looking for a decent axe to do a moderate amount of splitting, not necessarily cutting down trees, I think they are actually very durable, and the steel is good enough to hold an edge for utilitarian tasks such as splitting firewood. So first up is this little hatchet. I have taken this on camping trips for years, and it cuts wood, but honestly, I really don't think it's all that great. It's almost just a little too small to be useful, and in that case, it kind of makes it a little bit dangerous because you can swipe and hit your leg real easy. That's about it on that little guy. And we get to this next one. I think I've had this one for 16, 17 years, maybe 18 years. This is, I guess, their mid-size hatchet. And I think this is a great axe. It's very lightweight. And I can attest that I have left this in the Arizona sun for 5-6 months at a time at my wood pile. And this polycarbonate handle is still super strong. I've never had any issues with it. I've had other people use them, strike the handle. It's never broken. And the head is okay for splitting small to moderate sized logs. You're not going to split any big, thick oak with it. But if you're just wanting a single axe to take on camping trips and do some minor splitting at home, I think it's a fine axe. I usually touch these up either with a file, or in some cases I've used just my angle grinder with a flap disc wheel, and I just barely graze it super quick to give it what's known as a convex edge. But that's only when I'm at home. If I'm camping, I'll just use the file that is in this chainsaw box and just file on either side until I get a good burr, and then I just make sure I file it lightly until that burr's gone. And this is the Fiskars splitting maul. My in-laws got this for me 3 or 4 years ago, and this one will split oak with no problem. I've split some pretty thick stumps, and I'll include some images of cutting stuff on camping trips, but it is significantly longer than the last axe. You can see right there. and it's got a decent amount of heft. It's not a hugely wedged head, but it's got enough for the average size person to split decent size logs. And that's pretty much it. Again, I just will touch it up with a file, or in a rare case, if I have my angle grinder out with a flap disc, I'll just braze it real quick, just like that, a couple times each side until I make sure that the burr is gone. And that's pretty much it. Oh, one thing I do want to point out, the one thing on these axes that is terrible is the hammer end. So if you want to use this to put in tent pegs, not very good. This one's okay, but you're better off just using a mallet. And that is my full opinion on Fiskars axes. Well, I think that's going to do it for this little review of my firewood gathering kit, the chainsaw box, and my Fiskars axes. Hopefully it was interesting, and at the very least, maybe it gave you some ideas in case you might be in the market and looking for some utilitarian axes, or maybe if you're wanting to do the whole firewood thing and actually go out in the mountains like myself and cut it down and split it, maybe the chainsaw box and bow saw and all the things I showed you will give you a good starting point for setting that kind of those supplies up. And perhaps if you're up in Alaska or Montana and you cut like 10 cords of firewood a year, you may look at everything that I just shown and you might be shaking your head, and that's fine too. We probably go through maybe 1.5 cords to maybe just under 2 cords a year. Obviously I'm in Arizona, but we're at about 4,000 feet elevation, so we do get into the high teens and low 20s on occasion, but we do enjoy our fires inside and also in our fire pit, so it's not completely like life or death, but I do think it's definitely something that is good to have on hand as far as the means to gather your own firewood, especially with this winter coming up. You never know. And I always believe in being prepared is always the better option. So I think that's pretty much it. Maybe I'll show you some clips of the mountains, gathering firewood, and I don't know. Now I got to find Olive. I don't know what she's doing, but I will see you guys on the next one, and I think it's going to be a goat related video. And then after that, I promise I'm getting back to the travel trailer because I've been saying that for a few months now, and I think the next project is going to be pretty cool. So if you like this, give it a thumbs up. Hit the subscribe button if you want to see more similar content. Remember, you can see my videos on Rumble and Odyssey as well. And I will see you guys next time.